As we read literature about dinosaurs or watch videos and movies about them, we're often told that dinosaurs lived millions or hundreds of millions of years ago. In fact, the standard idea is that dinosaurs began to evolve about 220 million years ago and that they died out 65 million years ago. When you ask the simple question, how do you know that? Well, we're told that there are dating methods that give us these vast hundreds of million year ages. In fact, it's suggested to us that these dating methods would even give us dates of 4.5 billion years or more. Well, how do these dates work, and are they accurate? You see, as we look into these dating methods, we see that they are radiometric dating methods that are often used for these long ages of millions of years. And the way that that works is that there is a radioactive element. A radioactive element such as maybe uranium-238, and it breaks down into another element like lead. And so the radioactive element is the parent element. The lead would be the daughter element, and supposedly it takes 4.5 billion years for half of a sample of uranium-238 to break down into lead. And as we find a rock sample, we look at how much parent element and how much daughter element is in the sample, and then we extrapolate from that the date. The problem with that is that these dating methods are based on several assumptions. The first assumption, the first thing that cannot be proven and that shouldn't be granted to this discussion, is that the rate has always been the same. You see, that is the assumption upon which these radiometric dating methods are based, that if we can calculate something right now, then we will extrapolate back millions or billions of years, and we will have to say the rate that it's breaking down now is the rate that it's always broken down. But if that isn't true, then you could come into some very wrong dates. Suppose that you were watching a man chop down a tree and you looked on the ground and there were 24 trees that had been chopped down, and you timed how long it took him to chop down the tree you were watching. And it took him 1 hour. How long has this man been working? It's almost a trick question. But here's how the dating methods would work. You look at how long it took him to chop down one tree, you see how many trees are on the ground, and then you multiply that number of how long it took him to chop by how many are on the ground. And so if you see that it took him 1 hour to chop down a tree and there are 24 trees on the ground, then it would be a 24-hour process. But then you go to him and you ask him, how long have you been chopping trees? He explains to you that he's only been chopping trees for about 2.5 hours. When he was first starting and he had a good breakfast and his axe was sharp, he was chopping down 8 trees an hour or so, but then he started trailing off and he only chopped down a few trees this last half hour. And so you calculated based on the current rate of the one tree that it took him 1 hour, and you miscalculated by over 20 hours. You see, the problem of basing something on the assumption that the rate has always been the same. Could it be that the rate of decay in the past was different than it is today? Absolutely. That could perfectly well be the case. And so you can't grant the dating methods that assumption. Assumption number 2 is that there were no traces of the daughter element in the sample to start off with. You see, if you have a sample and it's got a certain amount of parent element like uranium-238 and a certain amount of daughter element such as lead in it, you have to assume that no lead was there to start with. There again, that's an assumption. You just can't grant these dating methods. Suppose you go to a person's swimming pool and you see that there is in the swimming pool a full swimming pool of water. And let's say it holds 3,000 gallons. And there is a hose that is running into the swimming pool, and that hose has been running now for about an hour, and you've been watching it, and it has put in 100 gallons of water Okay, so there are 3,000 gallons in the swimming pool. That hose puts in 100 gallons an hour. So how long has the hose been running into the pool? Well, you would start looking at that and you might say, well, it's been running, if you take the 100 and you take the 3,000 and divide it by 100, then you're going to get something like 30 hours. But then you knock on the door and you ask the people, hey, how long have you been running your hose? And they say, oh, this pool was almost full. We've only been running it for about 3 hours. It was full of water just about, but we had some kids playing it yesterday and they splashed a bunch of the water out. And so we were just topping it off. Well, they've only been running the hose for 3 hours now. But if we assumed there was no water in it to start with, well, that would change the amount of time that it's taken to run that hose considerably, wouldn't it? You see, the idea that no daughter element is in the sample to begin with, well, that just can't be assumed. In fact, what we find is many times when we know how old a rock will be, for example, an igneous rock that was formed by a volcano maybe near the islands of Hawaii, and we know that the rock is maybe only 200 years old. Well, when we take a sample of that and we look, we find that there is a considerable amount of daughter element already in the rock from the beginning. And so that dating method assumption that says there's no daughter element in it to start with, that just simply can't be granted. And then there's the third assumption upon which the dating methods are based, and that's that nothing has contaminated the rock for the last however many years it's been around. There's been no water that has come into the rock and added any elements or taken any elements out. There's been nothing that has altered the rock in any physical way as far as the parent element and daughter element goes. You know, the assumption that nothing has messed with a rock for the last 4 billion years, or the last 200 million years, or the last 50 million years, you just simply can't grant that. There is no telling what has messed with that rock and what has gone into the rock and what has come out of the rock in the last 100 years, 1,000 years, 2,000 years. And so that third assumption that nothing has contaminated or altered the makeup of the rock, well, it just simply can't be granted. You know, in 2005, the world of dinosaur discovery was rocked when a dinosaur fossil that was broken open, they began to study it in depth and they found that it wasn't fossilized, meaning it hadn't all been turned to stone, hadn't all been turned to a fossil. In fact, it looked like there was soft tissue in that particular dinosaur bone. And as they started looking at that soft tissue, they realized that it was stretchy and you could stretch it apart and let it go and it would snap back together. It looked like there were remnants of red blood cells in the sample. It was supposed to be a 70 million year old fossil that somehow has stretchy collagen and leftover red blood cells in it. Remarkably, when they found this soft tissue, instead of saying, hey, we've been wrong about these millions of years of dinosaur ages, it should not have been that long. There's no possible way that soft tissue could last for 70 million years. Instead of saying that, they said, well, this soft tissue has been miraculously preserved. Oh, there was a miracle at play, all right, but it wasn't the miracle of preserving soft tissue for 70 million years. The miracle that was at play and has been was God speaking this world into existence on that first week of creation. Humans and dinosaurs aren't separated by millions of years. God on day 6 created all land-living creatures, including dinosaurs, and that very same day, He miraculously brought into existence the first humans. You see, humans and dinosaurs were created on the same day, and they're not separated by millions of years. And those dating methods that supposedly give us 220 million years of time for dinosaurs to have been around in the past, well, they're simply based on assumptions that cannot be validated and should not be granted. Dinosaurs and humans were created together.